Tourniquets did not care what story a chart was trying to tell. In trauma, 4 seconds was the distance between a witness and a body bag. When they rolled Holt in under a drunk, violent tag, I had less than a minute to stop the bleed before the chart buried him under a duplicate code. Ghost was already growling at the door. The question was not whether the man on my table had been shot. It was who needed him mislabeled before sunrise. I had been finishing a chart on a kitchen knife mishap that should have belonged to urgent care, not my bay. Trying not to taste the old coffee skin floating on top of the paper cup by my elbow. The room hummed the way night hospitals always did. Too bright, too clean, and too tired. Overhead fluorescents buzzed in a thin white whine. The suction canister stank faintly of plastic and old saline. Industrial disinfectant sat in the back of my throat like something scorched. Then the doors blew open hard enough to shiver the glass. The wheels on the gurney hit the seam in the floor and scraped loudly against the metal. Air moved. Voices rose. Fresh blood cut through the antiseptic in one clean, coppery line. Holt came in gray around the mouth, boots still on, one sleeve torn, and clothes half thrown across his legs like somebody had given up on dignity before they got him through the doors. The bright sticker on his chest read "Drunk Violent" in thick black print, the kind of label people trusted because it saved them time. His eyes were too wide, showing he was not drunk and not crazy, but just in pain, shock, and whatever was left after both had started stripping a man down to reflex. Maura was already beside me, snapping monitor cuffs open and clipping leads on with the calm speed of someone who knew panic was for families and administrators. "Pressure's bottoming out," she said. "Patients getting combative." Her voice stayed level, but the words came quick. Around us, somebody muttered that security said he came in swinging. Somebody else asked if we needed restraints. Holt's fingers twitched over the rail, searching for a weapon that was not there, or a memory he could not shut off. I looked once at the blood soaking through the fabric high on his thigh, once at the way he was holding his torso, and once at the dark spray pattern dried along the side seam of his shirt. Bar fights made a mess. Broken bottles made ragged tears. Knife wounds lied in different ways. This was cleaner than all of them, and worse too. "That's not combativeness," I said, already moving. "It's hemorrhagic shock. Get me a hemostat. Now." My own voice went flat and hard, the way it did when the room stopped being a room and turned into a problem set. I skipped the intake questions, skipped the clipboard, clipped to the rail, and skipped everything designed to make bad decisions feel official. MARCH protocol came back the way an old scar woke in cold weather. Massive hemorrhage came first, always first. I cut the pant leg higher, and the wound told the truth the sticker had buried. It had a small entry, with no jagged tearing and no broken glass ugliness. A round had gone through him and kept going. Holt tried to rise on one elbow, half fighting the pain, half fighting some other battlefield, only he could still see. I planted a forearm across his pelvis, found the bleed by feel, and dragged the tourniquet around hard. I wrapped it high and tight, straight over the soaked uniform pants, with no clean skin and no delicate setup, applying just pressure and more pressure until the buckle bit and the arterial surge died under my hand. It took less than 4 seconds. My shoulder gave a sharp little protest, and I ignored it. Holt made a sound like he wanted to curse and pray at the same time. His boot heels hammered once against the rail, then stopped. Behind me, Ghost let out one low, steady growl from the threshold, where some idiot from security had let him wait on leash instead of in my truck. He was not looking at Holt. He was looking past the bay doors. I did not turn, not yet. If the dog had locked on something out there, it would still be there in 3 seconds. If I missed this bleed, Holt would not be. Once the hemorrhage slowed, the rest of the room rushed back in ugly pieces. Monitor tones settled into a colder rhythm. Someone shoved suction toward me. Someone else asked if we should call surgery radiology, or security. Maybe all three in the same useless breath. I wanted an airway check, pressure support, his clothes bagged, and every idiot with an opinion out of my light. Mara moved first, because Mara usually did. She counted off supplies under her breath, the way some people prayed. Holt's hand caught my wrist for a second. Not hard, just enough to tell me he knew the difference between being handled and being helped. There was dried mud on the cuff of his jacket, and under the blood and antiseptic, I caught something else. It was chemical and bitter, completely wrong for an ER pickup and wrong for a drunk hauled in off a Savannah curb. I glanced up at the wall monitor to pull his chart and watched the system hesitate, blink, then rewrite him in real time. The intake line shifted under my eyes. It read non-combat injury as a duplicate code, clean, neat, and buried alive. My coffee sat on the counter going cold, and somewhere beyond the bay doors, Ghost gave one more warning rumble. Lower this time, heavy enough to feel in my ribs. By the time Holt's pressure quit falling off a cliff, the room had settled into that false, calm trauma bays like to fake after the loud part was over. The monitor over his bed kept tapping out its thin, patient beat, a metronome with no sympathy in it. I stepped into the hallway, and the hospital hit me full in the face again. I smelled fluorescent light, burnt coffee, and disinfectant, while shoes whispered over the waxed floor. The computer terminal outside the bay was still awake, the screensaver gone, and the chart open like it had been waiting for me. Then it blinked and showed me the part somebody had not meant for a pair of human eyes. The system read, duplicate code, non-combat injury. The timestamp under it had been overwritten by hand at 0114. It was too clean and too fast, too neat for a night shift, drowning in actual work. I leaned closer, one hand braced on the counter, and watched the cursor jump once, like the system had second thoughts. No audit trail showed in the open field. That meant either privilege I did not have, or somebody counting on nobody looking this closely at a man stamped drunk violent. Fine. People got lazy around labels. That was how bodies disappeared without technically going missing. I heard the wheels of a supply cart rattle behind me and smelled Holt's torn clothes before I saw them. They smelled like mud, old river water, and diesel. Then something sharper threaded through it, chemical and mean, the kind of stink that clung to canvas after it had ridden too close to solvents or a machine wash run, hot enough to hide something. There was grit dried into the cuff seams, black under the fluorescence, not street dirt, more like dock runoff or the filth that built up where metal sweated all night. Maura came out carrying the pile in both arms, her jaw set, eyes already asking the question she was too smart to waste breath on. Holt started muttering again behind us, his voice shredded raw and nowhere near the present. Tango, Niner, Protocol. It was not drunk nonsense, and not random either. It was a fragment, a call sign chewed down to the bone. The monitor inside kept that same blunt, repeating beat. I kept my eyes on the screen and lowered my voice. Get all his gear into red biohazard bags. Do not scan the system barcodes. Maura did not blink. That was one of the reasons I trusted her, not because she agreed with me every time, but because she could hear a bad note in a room and stop pretending it was music. She crossed to the cabinet, pulled a red bag, and started feeding Holt's jacket, boots, and cut uniform into it, piece by piece. No scanner and no chain that could be rewritten by somebody 2 floors up. The smell came up stronger when the jacket moved, bringing chemical mud, river rot, diesel, and something metallic underneath. Maura counted under her breath as she worked, taking inventory by instinct, and every number sounded like another nail sealing the bag shut from the system. Outside the bay, somebody laughed too loud at the nurse's station, the sound rang against the suffocating quiet around the terminal. Inside, Holt rolled his head hard against the pillow and kept mumbling pieces he could not hold together. He muttered phonetics and procedure, his memory flashing like broken glass. I could have told myself it meant nothing. I did not. Cases lied all the time. Fabric usually did not. Neither did men who came apart in code instead of plain English. The handoff notice was buried 2 screens down under transfer prep, exactly where nobody would look unless they expected trouble. The form read pending external movement for Windows 0 to 10 with no name attached and no unit I recognized. It had just enough official language to make refusal expensive later. I felt my thumb find the St. Michael medal under my scrubs before I knew I was doing it. It was not prayer, but habit, a way to hold still while the inside of my head started rearranging furniture. Holt had come in bleeding from a gunshot, and somebody had relabeled him before his pressure stabilized. His clothes smelled like the port, not a bar floor. He was muttering clipped phonetics through shock. Now, a transfer window was already waiting on the chart, like the night had been scheduled around his body. I looked through the glass at him lying there under hospital light, pale and wired, and too alive for whoever had been in such a hurry. Then I looked past my own reflection to the hallway behind me, bright and empty, in the practiced way places got when people were about to move through them with purpose. By the time the clock in the corner rolled another minute, I was not just the doctor who had kept him alive. I was the one standing in the way when whoever wrote that code came to finish the paperwork. The air outside hit different after a trauma bay. Inside, everything was bleach, blood, bright light, and the lie that the building had control. Outside, Savannah gave you damp, cold, and metal left too long near salt water. I pushed through the ambulance entrance and headed for the lot with Holt's chart still running in the back of my head like a second pulse. Duplicate code, manual overwrite, pending movement at 0 to 10. Somebody had reached into my patient's file while his blood was still warm on my gloves. I told myself I was going to my truck for spare leads, fresh trauma shears, and the extra med pouch I kept in the back because hospitals always ran short on the wrong thing at the wrong time. That was true. It just was not the whole truth. Ghost was out there too, and I wanted his nose on the night before the night put hands on me first. Fog had rolled in thicker since midnight. It came off the river in a damp sheet and stuck to my face, my lashes, and the scar along my jaw. Sodium light from the edge of the lot turned everything the color of old nicotine, and cars sweated under it. My truck sat 3 rows down beneath a lamp that hummed like it was dying slowly. Ghost was in the rear kennel behind the cab, quiet, the way trained dogs got quiet when they were awake and pretending not to be. I heard him shift once when I came up on the driver's side. It was recognition, not excitement. I popped the trunk first, more out of habit than thought. The lid lifted with a tired hydraulic sigh. The smell in there was canvas, oil, old leather, disinfectant wipes, and the faint iron ghost of blood that never really left field gear. Then, Ghost made a sound from behind me, low and deep and steady enough to crawl under my skin. I turned just enough to catch him through the mesh. His body had gone from resting loose to locked tight in under a breath, with his head forward, ears tipped, and mouth shut. There was no barking, no frantic scratching, and no sloppy noise people expected from dogs they did not understand. There was just that low growl in his chest, heavy and dangerous, and the kind of stillness that meant the engine was already running. His weight had shifted onto his front legs. If I opened that kennel and gave him a word, he would come out hard and all business. The old strap on his harness hung against the door, and the brass anchor charm tied into it tapped the metal once, soft and almost delicate. Ghost's nose worked the damp air in short pulls. There was a chemical edge mixed with hot engine exhaust, and human sweat pushed sour by adrenaline. He was not guessing. He was sorting. I let the trunk stay open and stood there with one hand on the lid, feeling the cold bead up across my knuckles. Traffic from the frontage road moved in a lazy blur beyond the lot, headlights softened by fog. One set held back too cleanly. They were not lost and not wandering, just waiting. I eased the trunk down halfway and watched through the gap. There was an SUV across the access road. dark paint, lights low, and its shape blurred by mist until it almost disappeared when I looked straight at it. It rolled forward one light, stopped, then kept the same measured distance when a delivery van moved through the next intersection. They waited 2 beats, not crowding and not drifting off, keeping the same spacing again at the next cycle. They maintained light discipline, keeping enough distance not to trip the part of your brain built for obvious danger, but tight enough to hold contact if I pulled out. My shoulder blades went cold under my scrub top. Somebody had either followed Holt to my ER or picked me up the second I stopped being useful and started being inconvenient. Ghost gave that warning rumble again, deeper now, like a storm rolling inside concrete. I shut the trunk the rest of the way, and the slam echoed through the fog sharper than I liked. They're not just watching, they're coming for me. I said it quietly, mostly to hear whether it sounded paranoid out loud. It did not. It sounded late. I pulled the extra med pouch anyway, slung it over one shoulder, and unlocked the rear kennel just enough to put 2 fingers through the gap and touch Ghost between the eyes. His skin was hot under the short fur, showing all focus and no nerves wasted. "Easy," I murmured, though he was already easier than I was. My thumb brushed the anchor charm when I cinched his lead on. For half a second, I got that old, ugly flicker of memory, not a picture, more a pressure change. Then it was gone and good. Parking lots at 2 in the morning were no place to invite the dead into the conversation. I scanned the windows of the hospital, the reflected glow off the ER glass, and the moving shadows inside. If they had eyes on me out here, they might already have feet moving inside. Holt was upstairs, bleeding slower now, but still one bad decision away from getting rolled out under paperwork that looked official enough to calm cowards. I did not bother with the fantasy that security would save me the trouble. Security liked badges and forms, and so did administrators. Men who relabeled wounded veterans counted on that. Ghost stepped down from the kennel without a sound and pressed close to my leg, all controlled muscle and contained violence. Together we started back toward the entrance, through air that smelled like wet fog and engine oil, while that SUV sat in the dark, pretending it had nowhere else to be. When Ghost and I came back through the ambulance entrance, the ER felt different. It had the same lights and the same bleach, trying and failing to kill the smell of blood, coffee, sweat, and bad decisions. But now the place had that stretched, listening quality buildings got right before something broke. Mora caught my eye from Holt's Bay and gave me the smallest shake of her head. He was not worse and not better either. Holt was still alive, and his chart was still dirty. The clock over admissions read 0227, and every minute in the hospital sounded like it had edges. I clipped Ghost's lead shorter and kept him close to my left leg. He moved without pulling, his head low and nostrils working. The admin desk sat under fluorescent panels that made everybody look tired and guilty. That was where I saw him first. Vargo did not look like a man who expected resistance. He looked like a man who expected signatures. He wore a good coat and dry shoes, his hair still in place in weather that had turned everybody else damp around the collar. He stood at the counter with one hand resting on a thin folder and the other near his earpiece, not touching it yet. His shadow fell hard across the tile under the white overhead light. Beside him, Danforth had arranged himself into the posture of a man, hoping paperwork might save him from having to be brave. He smoothed the front of his white coat twice, buying time with his own hands, his eyes fixed on the top page Vargo had laid out. I heard the paper before I reached them, that sharp, dry flick of a corner being lifted and set back down. In the silence around it, the sound cut like a blade. Vargo glanced at Ghost, then at me, and I watched him decide the dog was not the part of this conversation he could push around. "Doctor," he said, calm as if we were discussing billing, "we're here for patient transfer." His fingers slid to the earpiece, then away. It was his first adjustment, small and automatic. He turned the folder so I could see the header, which read, "Custody, Transfer, and Temporary Emergency Authority." It had enough seals and block print to make a weak administrator feel protected, but not enough to make it real. The hospital air was too cold under those lights, and I could feel the damp from the parking lot drying on my face in a thin film. Ghost stood motionless at my knee, but the fur along his shoulders had lifted just a shade. Danforth cleared his throat in the tone men used when they wanted the room to believe they were still in charge. His voice was watery and strained, an administrative hush meant to keep panic from becoming public. He kept his gaze on the page when he spoke, not on me, which told me all I needed to know about where his nerve had gone. Vargo laid his palm flat on the paperwork like he was blessing it. "We do this clean. I've got 2 kids in college." There it was. It was not a threat, exactly, but a plea dressed like procedure. He wanted me to hear tuition, family, and mortgages. He wanted this to sound like one more ugly job nobody had the luxury to moralize over. Danforth finally looked at me, damp-eyed and careful behind his lenses. The hospital assumes no liability for out-of-network legal disputes. He managed to make the line sound both rehearsed and frightened, which was honestly more impressive than courage would have been. I did not touch the paperwork. If you touched bad paper too soon, men like Vargo read it as consent to play by their rules. Danforth did not want Holt, and he did not want Vargo either. What he wanted was for both of us to stop existing before this reached a board meeting. I could smell toner, stale coffee, and the faint medicinal dust of the admissions printer warming up behind the desk. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor sounded a sharp tone, quick and impatient. "He's unstable," I said. "He's not going anywhere." My own voice came out flat enough to shave with. Danforth's mouth tightened, and Vargo did not smile. He was not playing movie villain. He was working a job, and he needed me to stop being a problem on paper before he had to solve me any other way. The silence after that lasted maybe 3 seconds, long enough for the whole ER to pretend it was not listening. Vargo picked up the packet, flipped to the second page, and tapped a paragraph with one blunt finger. "Doctor, if you obstruct an authorized transfer, this becomes something bigger than your patient." His hand rose to the earpiece again. It was his second adjustment, smaller than the first, but there. It was a signal or a reflex, but either way it meant his clean route was thinning out. Danforth took 1/2 step back from the counter, not enough to be obvious, but enough to leave me standing closer to Vargo than he was. That told me which direction his fear was facing. Ghost let a low vibration roll through his chest, barely audible unless you knew him. Vargo heard it anyway. His eyes dropped once, then came back to mine, colder than before. He was not rattled, just recalculated. I left my hand resting near Ghost's collar and held Vargo's stare. "No," I said. Just that. Nothing heroic and nothing loud. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Danforth looked trapped inside his own coat. Vargo closed the folder, squared the edges against the desk with precise little taps. And in that tiny, careful movement, I knew we were done pretending this was going to stay administrative much longer. The folder had barely stopped tapping against the counter when the whole wing changed its mind about being a hospital. Somewhere past the double doors, an alarm kicked loose in a thin electronic sound. Not fire and not cardiac, but something administrative and ugly. It was an OR access lockdown. The sound ran along the ceiling and into my teeth. Magnetic locks snapped hard enough for me to hear them engage one by one down the corridor. Vargo did not flinch, which was the part I hated. Danforth did. His shoulders jumped, his eyes going wide behind his glasses, and Vargo finally reached up and pulled the earpiece free, like he was done pretending any of this was still procedure. He dropped it into his pocket and looked at me with the last of the paperwork already dead in his face. Ghost pressed forward against my leg, silent and hot with focus. I did not waste breath on Danforth. Men like him became furniture the second things got physical. I turned and moved fast for Holt's Bay, just as the automatic doors started sealing off sections of the hall. Behind me, I heard somebody shout for security and somebody else shout for legal, which pretty much summed up the modern American response to trouble. Maura already had the rail down on Holt's gurney when I hit the room. She took one look at my face and handed me the red bag without asking whether I needed it. She was a good nurse and a better human. Holt was half conscious, pale under the fluorescent wash, trying to push up on one elbow like pain was an insult he could still win against. "We're moving," I told him. He muttered something that might have been no or might have been somebody's rank. It did not matter. I yanked the brake free, shoved the gurney into motion, and felt the extra drag of his weight and the IV pole fighting the turn. Ghost ranged ahead and back in short, tight arcs, in patrol mode now, checking corners and reading scent and motion with that deep animal math I had learned to trust more than cameras. We made the OR corridor just as the next set of doors started crawling shut. I jammed a shoulder through, pain sparking down my old injury, and rammed the gurney over the threshold hard enough to make the wheels rattle. The stairwell door waited at the end of the hall like the last honest thing in the building. Cold metal bar, narrow glass slit. It had fatal funnel written all over it. I shoved Holt through first, dragged the gurney sideways into the landing, then slammed the door and threw the lock. The stairwell swallowed sound and made it worse. Every footstep came back doubled, and every breath felt borrowed. Concrete sweat and old dust, mixed with the sharp electric smell of alarm circuitry heating up in the walls. Ozone, mixed with human sweat and blood. The whole place stank like panic trying to pass for control. Holt rolled against the rails and grabbed at my sleeve. Not to stop me, just to anchor himself to something alive. Below us, the crash of the door hit once. Then again, harder. It was a boot this time, not a hand. I slid Holt deeper onto the landing, wedged the gurney at an angle to narrow the approach, and put Ghost on the hinge side, where the door would open blind for the man coming through. "Hold! Track!" The commands came out low and rough, more growl than speech. Ghost locked down instantly, his weight coiled and his eyes fixed on the gap. That was the thing about trained violence. It looked like patience, right up until it did not. The latch tore loose on the third hit, when metal struck concrete, and a man came through fast, leading with speed and confidence, and a compact rifle he could not bring fully around in the space he had chosen. It was a bad angle for him, and a better one for me. Ghost hit low and hard, not some movie leap, just enough body, teeth, and momentum to jam the man's step and open his line. I went into him before he recovered. There was no graceful choreography and no clean disarm from a training brochure. I drove my forearm into his chest, feeling panic and breath all at once, then smashed his gun hand against the rail until the weapon clanged loose. He caught me with an elbow on the backswing that lit my right shoulder up white. For a second, my arm went stupid and heavy. Then instinct took over where elegance had died. I shoved him backward into the narrowing triangle between the door, the rail, and the gurney. Fatal funnel worked both ways, if you were mean enough. He swung again, clipped my collarbone, and I answered with a knee that folded him just enough for Ghost to tear him off balance for real. We all went down ugly. My shoulder hit concrete. His head struck the step edge with a heavy impact. I lay there a beat too long, sucking air that tasted like rust and hot wiring, while the alarm kept whining above us and more boots pounded somewhere below. Blood worked warm under my scrub sleeve. Not deep, but enough. Ghost came back to me on his own, his sides heaving now, a dark smear on his muzzle that was not his. I pushed up, grabbed the fallen rifle by its sling, and looked down the stairwell. The path was blocked below, with too many echoes and too many men. Up was the only direction left. I got Holt moving again, pain biting down my neck and into my spine, and started hauling him toward the roof door through air that felt thinner with every step. The roof door blew open under my shoulder, and the night came in hard. Cold river air hit first, wet enough to taste. Then the wind, carrying harbor grit, diesel, and the flat metallic smell of rain that never quite fell. My face was wet with fog and sweat and something meaner. I dragged Holt across the threshold and got him down behind a low HVAC unit while Ghost came through at my heel, breathing louder than before. Holt made one broken sound and curled around the pane without fully waking. The stair climb had cost all of us. My right shoulder throbbed where the man in the stairwell had tagged me, and the ache ran down into my wrist in a way I knew too well. It was old damage waking up because the universe loved repetition. The rifle I had taken off the contractor was not built for elegance. The rifle had a compact frame and a magnified optic, good enough to matter. Warm air from the vents rolled into the fog and made the sight picture twitch before I ever brought the stock up. Mirage on a hospital roof at 3 in the morning. Savannah had a mean sense of humor. I dropped to a knee and brought the optic to my eye. My hands felt steady, right up until I asked them to be. And then the tremor showed itself, tiny and vicious. It was a cold bore shot, the first round out of a rifle I had not zeroed. Under weather I did not control, with a shoulder that wanted to quit. Perfect. I breathed in, held, and let half of it go. The stairwell bulkhead door scraped open below the vent noise, and Vargo came through low and smart, not charging, not shouting, with his pistol already up. He had shed the paperwork face downstairs. This was the other man, the one the paperwork had been protecting. I tracked him through the glass, waited for the moment he crossed the open slice between the bulkhead and the vent stack, and fired. The shot cracked through the wet air, and the round chewed a line out of the concrete just left of him. It was a miss, but close enough to spit dust across his coat, not close enough to stop him. He turned on the sound fast, his muzzle hunting for me through the haze. "Missus did not just waste time," they announced you. I worked the rifle back in and felt my shoulder protest harder. There was no time for clean math now. I used Kentucky windage, the ugly cousin of precision. Vargo shifted left, using the vent housing for partial cover, and I saw his head angle toward Holt when Holt coughed behind me. That told me everything. He would shoot past me if it gave him the cleaner line. Ghost saw the commitment in him too, and his whole body changed. His head went low and his weight shifted forward. Every muscle gathered under that black and tan coat like a fist closing. I did not think my way into it. Bite. Ghost launched on the word, fast enough that for a second he vanished inside the fog and reappeared attached to Vargo's gun arm. The bite landed high at the wrist and forearm, with nothing cinematic about it. There was just impact, then pressure, and then the heavy pressure of Vargo's arm giving up under 400 pounds of canine certainty. Vargo made a sound I had heard before, from men used to control who had just lost it. The pistol went off anyway. One shot, close, deafening on that roof. Ghost jerked hard, and the next thing I saw was blood spreading dark through the fur over his shoulder. He still held on, his body twisting with the effort, while Vargo staggered and tried to wrench free with his other hand. "Not you too." The words came out before I knew I had spoken them. Then training dragged me back by the throat. I braced the rifle against the edge of the unit, gave the sight the correction it had been begging for. A little right, a little high, putting less trust in the glass and more in the shimmer boiling off the vents. I breathed once, twice. The Mirage trembled, my shoulder burned. Trigger pressure came on slow and even. Break. The second shot took Vargo's center mass and folded him backward into the gravel. The pistol skidded away. Ghost released late, stumbled, and nearly went down before I caught him. His breath came fast and shallow against my wrist when I got pressure on the wound. It was not a graze and not a gift. The roof smelled like gunpowder, hot metal, and blood. Below us, the alarms kept crying and doors kept slamming, and the whole hospital kept trying to pretend it was still a system instead of a hunt. I looked once at Vargo, lying still in the mist, and once at Ghost, bleeding into my hands, and knew exactly what had burned away up there. Whatever civilian cover I had left was gone. Blood marked dogs, and it marked people too. The secured room off the roof was barely bigger than a janitor's closet with delusions of authority. The room had cinder block walls, a metal desk bolted to the floor, one dead monitor, one live terminal, and one shelf with binders nobody had opened in years. I dragged the door shut with my good hand and felt the latch catch. Outside, the alarm still bled through the concrete. Thinner now, farther away, but not gone. Ghost sank to the floor the second I got him clear. His shoulder was slick under my palm, blood working through the fur in hot pulses that had already slowed enough to scare me in a different way. Holt lay propped against the wall under the narrow window, pale and sweating, trying not to look at the body count his night had bought. I tore open a field, dressing with my teeth, pressed it into Ghost's wound, and listened to him breathe. He breathed fast and shallow, which was angry and good, because angry meant present. The brass anchor charm on his worn lead caught the fluorescent spill and flashed once, dull gold through blood. I got a pressure bandage around Ghost, one-handed and ugly, tight enough to matter, not pretty enough for a classroom. He snapped once from pain, not at me, just at the air, then shoved his muzzle hard against my knee and held there. Holt watched with the fixed stare of a man trying to decide if I was real. His jacket was still half on, soaked through and stiff, where old river muck had dried into the seams. I knelt in front of him and went through the pockets fast. Inside the inner breast pocket, wrapped in a greasy fold of receipt paper and damp from sweat, I found the memo book. It was small enough to lose and heavy enough not to be trash. The cover was swollen and warped, weatherproofed once upon a time, then abused by years of pockets and bad weather and men who wrote in a hurry. When I opened it, the pages gave under my fingers, with a wet little rasp, wrinkled waterproof paper, hissing and whispering beneath blood-slick skin. Holt swallowed and dragged in a breath that shook on the way out. I kept turning pages. I saw columns of initials, dates, transfer notes reduced to shorthand, payment marks, and route tags that were not elegant and not coded by geniuses. They were coded by people who thought ordinary accounting language could wash blood off the work. They mislabeled you to kill you. All for a damn balance sheet. I set it to the paper more than to him. Once I had the shape of it, the rest came together fast and ugly. The same clipped notation I had seen on Vargo's transfer packet downstairs showed up 3 pages in, right beside a vehicle code that matched the temporary transport ID on the custody form. It was not the whole number, just enough to make coincidence tap out. A payment shorthand sat next to it, with the kind of bland language men used when they wanted murder to sound billable. The notes read, clean recovery, external exposure, and non-combat adjustment. Holt was not the center of some giant machine. He was worse than that in a way. He was a line item inside a finite operation, built to scrape risk-off contracts and shove living people into the column where legal trouble went quiet. It was cheap, dirty, and local enough to function. I spun the terminal toward me and wiped blood off my fingertips on my scrub pants before I touched the keys. The hospital intranet was still up, though the cursor lagged like it was thinking about betraying me. I fed in the chart number, then the duplicate code, then the transfer notation from the ledger. Crosslinks lit one by one. The crosslinks showed an access anomaly, an administrative override, and pending movement. The machine did not care about justice. It cared about liability exposure. Fine. It was the same difference if you knew where to stick the knife. The upload path sat buried under internal quality review, 3 menus deep beneath language designed to make people quit before they reached the dangerous part. I attached screenshots, chart history, the transfer code, and the shorthand page from the ledger, then flagged the whole mess for legal hold, an audit escalation with Danforth's service line in the blast radius. Outside the room, I heard running feet. Then a radio sound. Then somebody swearing as an elevator override failed. The terminal gave me 2 sharp tones while the file compiled. Then a progress bar crawled across the screen. Ghost shifted against my shin and let out a ragged breath through his teeth. Holt stared at me, like he could see the point where Doctor ended and something older stepped into the light. The screen flashed once, thought about freezing, then stamped the file with a plain word that changed the room. Uploaded. Somewhere downstairs, somebody's clean transfer was already turning into an audit trail with names attached. Danforth would feel the choke chain first. Vargo was dead. The cell was not. And with one click, I had just traded the last believable version of my old civilian life for a fight that was going to keep finding my address. By the time I got Ghost down to the pier, the sky had started changing in all the ways night pretended not to notice until it was too late to stop it. The dark over the water had thinned from black to iron gray, and the sodium lamps along the dock still burned with that dirty yellow color that made everything look already compromised. The fog was lifting by degrees, dragged apart in pale bands over the river. Holt was in the back seat, wrapped in blankets and silence, alive enough to complain later if he earned the chance. Mora had answered on the second ring with nothing but my name and a breath that told me she already understood this was the kind of call that could cost a license. I had told her where the off-record packet would land and what not to say over any line that could be subpoenaed. She had not wasted us with courage speeches because she was a good nurse and a better human. Now the truck idled beside rusted bollards and wet rope, while the river pushed fog around the pilings in slow white drifts. A container ship out in the channel let out a horn so low and long it sounded less like a machine than a tired thing trying not to break. I sat on the tailgate beside Ghost and felt the whole night settling into my bones in layers. He was awake, which was the first miracle I was allowing myself. The second was meaner and smaller, because he was still watching the world instead of drifting away from it. I had cleaned and packed the shoulder as best I could without a proper table, clipped the fur, wrapped the bandage twice when once did not convince me, and still the dressing showed a slow, dark bloom at the edge. His breathing came in broken pulls, each one careful, each one costing him. Fatigue had taken the shine off him. Good. That meant he was real. The anchor charm at his lead lay against the bandage line. Old brass gone almost brown with age, except where my thumb had worn a small clean crescent into it over the years. Trent used to rub it the same way before he stepped into bad places. Like metal could trick luck into paying attention. I touched it now and felt the chill of it under my thumb, slick with dawn damp and dried blood. Ghost lifted his head just enough to nudge my wrist, then let it drop again onto my thigh with no drama and just contact. The device in my hand was not fancy. That was the point. It was a small encrypted unit, battery chewed down, screen scratched, and useful in the unromantic way real things usually were. I loaded the audit packet first, the one already inside the hospital bloodstream, then the second set, for the dead man switch route. It was not a press dump, and not some fantasy about one heroic email fixing the Republic, just redundancy. It was one path through the system that wanted to save its own skin. It was one path outside it, routed to Mora with timed release instructions and enough attached proof that deleting one copy would only create more questions. My right shoulder burned every time I lifted my arm, and the pain made my hand clumsy for a second over the controls. I hit send. The unit answered with one clean sound. That was all. There was no dramatic upload fanfare, no sirens, and no cavalry. Just a sound small enough to miss if you were busy lying to yourself. The file went out into the wet gray morning and kept going. One copy into channels Danforth could not quietly erase without sawing through his own fingers. One copy into Mora's hands and beyond them if she stopped checking in. I looked back toward the city and saw no flashing red and blue bloom, and no line of police cars sweeping the dock. That was the part that hurt in a clean way. There was not going to be a neat ending. There would be no courtroom montage, no relieved laugh, and no speech about truth winning. Holt would stay alive or he would not. Maura would keep her head down, or they would come after her too. Danforth would spend the rest of his week pretending he had been a cautious professional instead of a frightened man hiding inside policy. And me, I would get maybe a few hours before the next move came looking for my name. I could feel that already, same as I could feel Ghost's heat fading under my hand and the ache in my shoulder, settling into something I would be carrying a while. The old civilian cover was gone. Maybe it had been gone the second I touched Holt's chart. I rested my palm on Ghost's neck and let my thumb find the brass anchor charm again. Cold metal, wet air, diesel, salt, blood, and the first weak wash of daylight over the harbor. Ahead of us, the river kept moving like none of this mattered to it. Behind us, the city sat still in the way dangerous places sometimes did, right before they remembered your name. Ghost looked up at me, tired and steady, waiting for the next command, like he still believed there would be one worth following. I leaned down until my forehead almost touched his, and listened to the ship horn drag itself across the water like a warning nobody could prove belonged to us. Then I touched the anchor and spoke. Yeah, we're not done, but we're still here.